dark. Before I start this video, I would just like to thank you all for sticking by me in the time of no content. I was in the dark for a little while, but let me tell you this. It's a very strange and mysterious place. So now it's time to step into the light once more and fear the dark. Now, on with the video. What I saw on Suicide Watch. I've made some stupid mistakes in my life. One of the dumbest by far was attempting to end my own life. I wish I'd never tried it. I was severely depressed and had been for a long while. The psychiatrist I'd been seeing for years was little help. Dr. Phelps simply prescribed me more and more medications until my day began to revolve around taking a new pill every hour or two. I was in no shape to hold down a job, and I found myself growing more and more isolated each day from the few friends I had, and the misery of loneliness was killing me. The method I used to attempt suicide was death by overdose. Out of all my options, it seemed the most painless. It would certainly leave the smallest mess to clean, I thought. Late one night, I took all of my remaining prescription medications at once, then washed them down with an entire fifth of spiced rum I found in the cabinet. It doesn't take a genius to tell that that method never works. I woke up in the hospital with a tube down my throat. My mother had found me a few hours after I passed out cold, and figure out what had happened from the empty pill bottles and the tear-stained note on my desk. She called an ambulance, and when I arrived at the hospital, the ER doctor ordered my stomach pumped. When I woke, the nurses had to restrain me to keep me from removing the tube myself. For all of my efforts, the doctor decided that I needed to be placed in an involuntary hold for the next 5 days. Unfair, but perfectly legal in the state of Pennsylvania. Despite my protests, they reminded me that they had the legal right to detain me in order to make sure I was in a sound state of mind. So it was that they carted me off to the psychiatric unit to sit and contemplate my actions for the better part of a week. If I'd only been more compliant and apologetic, I might not be in the mess I'm in now. The room that the doctors put me in looked less like a prison cell than I had anticipated. That was certainly nothing special either. It was a plain white room with a twin-sized bed, a desk with a chair, and a window. That was it. The bed lacked sheets, and the room was devoid of any other decorations, perhaps to avoid giving me items to injure myself with. In the corners of the room were 3 cameras, presumably aimed to cover each other's blind spots. Every inch of the room, even the toilet, was on camera. The first day passed uneventfully. I ate the food that I was given at mealtimes, and I stared out the window into the courtyard below the entirety of the day. I watched busy doctors and nurses jog through the centre, passing by the meandering visitors, and I wondered what their lives were like. I wondered if they'd ever been where I was. I hope not. When it was time to sleep, the charge nurse came by with some linens on a cart and a Dixie cup full of medications. She told me to take everything in the cup and wash it down with water. I did as I was told and swallowed each pill carefully. I was out like a light within the hour, adrift in a peaceful, dreamless sleep. It was the next morning when things started to go so terribly awry for me. I awoke with a sinking feeling in my stomach, some lingering sense of dread that refused to budge. Something just seemed wrong. As soon as I glanced up, I realized what it was. I wasn't alone. There in the far corner of the room by the window sat a young woman. I guessed by what features I could see that she was in her mid-20s, a bit older than I was. She was crouched in a fetal position, with her long hair draped over her shoulders, obscuring her face. Like me, she wore a loose-fitting hospital gown and white socks. "Hello," I called to her. No response. I decided to try again. I asked, "Did they put you in here too?" The answer was obvious, but there was still no response. "Okay," I said. "You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to." As soon as the words left my mouth, the woman's head shot up. Her bloodshot eyes met my gaze, and I felt a shiver run up my spine. She just sat there, staring, unmoving, unblinking, just staring. I looked up at the camera opposite me and waved at it. Not a minute later, a nurse came wandering in. "What's up?" the man asked as he entered the room. He seemed oddly relaxed, unlike the other hospital staff I'd encountered. I motioned to the woman sitting in the corner, staring daggers at me. "Wanna tell me I have a cellmate next time?" I said sarcastically. The nurse glanced to the corner, then back at me. He shrugged. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "The woman sitting there," I sighed. "Please tell me next time you want to put someone in here with me. It was a bit startling to wake up to." "But there's no one in here," the nurse said. "I'm looking right at her," I insisted. The nurse gathered the linens off my bed for me and walked to the door. "You know what, Gabe? I'll be right back," he said, gingerly shutting the door behind him. I looked back to the woman to find her standing now, porcelain arms at her side and the head slumped forward. Just as before, she was completely motionless. The nurse came back in a few moments later, with a handful of pills and a cup of water. "Take these," he said. "It's time for your medication. This should help with the woman in the room, okay?" So he thought I was crazy. I took the medication I was given without protest, and within the hour I began to feel tired and sluggish. All I wanted to do was sit in the windowsill and watch the busy people go about their lives, but the woman never moved from her corner by the window. Not even a twitch. She just stood there, arms forward, shoulders slouched. She didn't even seem to breathe. If the medications the nurse gave me were supposed to make the woman go away, they certainly weren't working. After several moments of looking the woman up and down, I decided to test whether or not she was real. Fighting the brain fog for that the meds induced, I stood on wobbly legs and slowly approached the woman. She was incredibly still, like a doll, that had been propped up in the corner. I reached out to touch her on the shoulder. Just before my hand made contact, her head snapped up again. Her mouth fell open unnaturally wide. And she let out a shrill scream that echoed through the room. I tumbled backward with a yell, hitting my head on the cold white floor below. Within seconds, the nurse came charging into the room. "What's wrong, Gabe?" he called. All I could focus on was the woman hovering over me, mouth open wide and bloodshot eyes boring into me. She made an odd gurgling noise and reached out to touch me. From that angle, I could see her cracked porcelain skin and the dirt under her fingernails. I flinched and scrambled away. "Get her out of here!" I howled. "There's no one else in here," the nurse reminded me. "She's right there! Stop gaslighting me," I said. "I'm not crazy." The nurse's only response was a syringe full of some clear fluid. He grabbed my arm gently and found the vein, and injected it, then lifted me off the floor and helped me back to bed. Within moments of the injection, everything went hazy. The room spun uncontrollably. Once I was safely in bed, the nurse left and came back with some bedding, then tucked me in like a child and left. I passed the rest of the day in a fog, watching the woman drift from corner to corner. She never took her eyes off me, and she never came any closer. She simply changed the vantage point from which she watched me. Too tired to care, I let my eyes slide shut, and I drifted off into a dreamless sleep. When I awoke, I nearly screamed. There, clinging to the tiled ceiling, was the strange woman. Her long black hair dangled from the vantage point she'd chosen, where she was perched like a spider, waiting patiently for its prey. Her head was twisted at an impossible angle. Any normal person's neck would break if twisted 180 degrees. She stared down at me, unblinking, and when our eyes met, her mouth twisted into a toothy grin. Rows upon rows of jagged teeth revealed themselves to me, with her awful smile. I shot out of bed, still a bit hazy from the medication I'd been given, and rushed to the door, where I began screaming and rattling the doorknob. A nurse was at the door within a minute, a different nurse than yesterday's, asking what's the matter. "I need you to move me," I said frantically. "Please, she's going to get me if you don't. Move me to a different room." "The ward is full," the nurse replied simply. "I'm afraid I can't do that." I turned to glance at the woman over my shoulder and found that she had crept closer while I desperately tried to escape. Her left hand was outstretched and frozen in place, as though she had stopped crawling when I turned to look at her. "Please!" I wailed. There was no response. The nurse had gone. I turned back to the woman and found that she'd crawled a bit closer. I could see then that she was emaciated and covered in large, ugly purple bruises that contrasted with her pale skin. She looked almost skeletal, with sunken eyes and hollow cheekbones. She opened her mouth again. Unsure of what else to do, I sank into a fetal position and huddled up against the door, not daring to take my eyes off the woman again. Every time I blinked, I found her in a new position, slightly closer to me than she had been before. She moved like a cat stalking its prey, one quick motion at a time, freezing in place every time I opened my eyes. I stared her down and she stared back, as if challenging me to blink or turn away again, for even a second. My stomach twisted into knots. I felt the bile rise in my throat as the world around me spun. Just then the door swung outward. I lost my balance and rolled back, right into the charge nurse. Unfazed, she held out a cup full of water and a handful of medication for me to take, like usual. The woman on the ceiling scuttled back to the far corner, again her expression darkening. I leapt to my feet and took the medication gratefully. Though it wouldn't make the strange woman go away, it would at least numb the fear that I felt. "Listen," I told the charge nurse before she could leave. "I need you to move me to a different room, please. I can't stay here." "I heard you earlier," the nurse said, "and I'm afraid I can't, because every room in the ward is full. Otherwise I'd gladly move you. Please switch me with someone then, please," I begged. "I can't do that," she answered and turned to leave. "Your lunch will be here shortly. Until then, try to relax." "Lunch? What time is it?" I asked. "Noon. You slept till morning." I did as I was told and returned to bed. The woman in the corner had come down from the ceiling and was standing by my bedside, weeping softly into her hands. Her tangled hair obscured her face. "What is it you want?" I asked her, voice trembling. The sobbing continued, a little louder than before. It was then that I realized ignoring her might be the best course of action. I laid down and rolled over in bed, facing away from the strange woman. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to not let her out of my sight, but I ignored the warning bells and laid facing the door. Her muffled sobs and sniffles continued, but she made no other moves to solicit my attention. I passed the rest of the day just like that, on my side, daydreaming about going home and playing some video games, far away from the awful woman in the eerie sterility of the psychiatric ward. Dinner came and went. I scarfed down my meal of grilled chicken and mashed potatoes, then took my medication without a fuss when it was time. The woman never moved from her spot by my bedside. She simply kept weeping into her hands. I did my best to avoid looking at her. That night, I drifted off to sleep, to the sound of her soft crying and hiccuping. In the morning, I awoke to find her still there at my bedside. Her face was twisted into a hideous grimace, and her hand was outstretched, dangerously close to my face. She was trying to cover my mouth. I could do nothing but lay there, as she placed a frigid hand over my face and pressed down. Try as I might to move away from her grasp, I couldn't move a muscle. Not to struggle, not to scream. All I could do was sit back and watch her suffocate me. She leaned in close, her matted black hair brushing against my cheeks, and placed a second hand on top of the first. I felt her push down, hard, resting what little body weight she had on her two hands. All of a sudden, I regained control of my muscles, and heaved the woman off of me. I inhaled with a loud gasp, then leapt out of bed and backed into the corner, furthest from her. She looked at me and tilted her head to one side. I made a face somewhere between a grimace and a grin. I couldn't take my eyes off of her rows of jagged yellow teeth. With an outstretched hand, she beckoned me towards her slowly. "Nurse!" I screamed. "Nurse, please!" My heart pounded in my chest as I called repeatedly for someone, anyone, to come and help me. The woman edged closer, taking a single shambling step towards me. I huddled into a ball and shrieked at the top of my lungs, and the door to the room gently opened to reveal the male nurse from before. "You're still here," he said, surprised. "5-day watch," I answered shakily. "Please, you've got to help me, man. The woman is still here and she's—" "I heard the doctor's letting you go today," the nurse interrupted. He hadn't been listening to a word I said. At that news, I almost started crying. "Really?" I asked. "Well, yeah. He said you seem to be struggling with hallucinations, but you're not suicidal. So he'll be by to discharge you later this afternoon, with some new prescriptions, of course." I could have hugged the guy if I wasn't frozen in fear. The nurse gave me my medication and helped me up off the floor, then tried to guide me back to bed. I stood my ground and shook my head. "What's wrong?" the nurse asked. "Oh, wait, you were seeing things." "The woman," I clarified. "Like a demon, she was crawling on the ceiling and then she tried to kill me." "I can assure you there's no woman in here," he said with a warm smile. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you. You're safe. Now come on, let's get you back to bed." I shook my head and pulled away from his grasp. "I'm fine where I am, thanks," I told him. The nurse just shrugged and gathered up my bedding. "Suit yourself," he said. "If I don't see you again, I hope things get better for you soon." "Thanks, man. I hope so too," I said. The door clicked shut behind him. I turned my attention back to the woman, who had once again moved. She stood at the bedside with a bitter expression. She stood there motionless, just watching. I didn't dare take my eyes off of her. It wasn't long before the doctor came by, clipboard in hand. He explained that he was here to discharge me, and that he would be placing me on several medications, given my peculiar behaviours while I was in the hospital's care. He seemed convinced that I was schizophrenic. I didn't argue with him because I was eager to leave. I took the prescriptions he handed me and nearly ran him down, trying to escape the room I'd been cooped up in for the past few days. When the doctor escorted me out of the room I'd been imprisoned in, I gathered my belongings from the charge nurse's desk and turned to find my mother waiting at the end of the hall for me, with tears in her eyes. As I walked past my room for the final time, I glanced inside it to find that it was completely empty. The woman was gone. Mum embraced me in a tight hug, crying about how worried she'd been and what a fright I'd given her. She made me promise never to do something so stupid again, and she talked to me non-stop about her restless nights and unending guilt the whole way to the pharmacy to fill my prescriptions, and then to the car. When we got out to the parking lot, I froze. Standing next to Mum's little Ford Fiesta was the woman from the hospital room. She was still in her hospital gown, and she looked angry. I panicked and jerked my hand out of my mother's grasp. She turned to me, startled, to ask what was wrong, and I pointed frantically at the woman blocking the passenger side door. "It's her," I babbled. "The woman from the hospital, it's her. She followed me." Mum smiled sadly and walked to the door, opening it for me. The woman from the hospital room scowled and stepped aside as the door swung open. "Here, love," she said to me. "Get in." I ran to the car and jumped inside, pulling the door shut behind me as quickly as I could. Mum looked sullen as she climbed into the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. I watched in the rear-view mirror as we left the terrifying woman behind. I was excited to be back home after so long in the hospital. The 30-minute car ride flew by, and I was greeted by my dogs happily jumping and licking at my face. As I opened the door, my father even looked up from his football game and rose to his feet to welcome me home. At that moment, I couldn't imagine what drove me to try and end my life. It was good to be alive. Mum baked my favourite chocolate chip cookies to celebrate me coming back, which I happily munched on while I was playing video games with friends. I stayed up into the early hours of the morning enjoying my freedom from the psychiatric unit. As the sun rose, I decided it was finally time to sleep. So I took my new medication, turned off my computer, and climbed into bed. I rolled over to face the door, and something in my closet caught my attention. There, visible in the dim light, was a pair of bloodshot eyes, watching me from the dark. That was Suicide Watch. If you ever hear a strange gargling sound coming from somewhere in your room, or spot some bloodshot eyes in your closet, all you can do is close your eyes and pray that she doesn't get you. The world is a very strange and mysterious place at night. So remember, fear the dark. Good night.